Hey guys, this is Alex from Wilkinson Audio. I'm going to show you how to mix a generic drum sound. And I also have, as a learning material, I have a video I took of the session that shows the mic placements that resulted in the tracks that we're going to be working with. So the first thing we're going to look at is these overheads here. As you can see, we have 3 overheads. This is called the weather vane method, and it has it's a little narrower than a traditional space pair. It's we have 2 KM184s and then an R121 ribbon mic here. And these are panned, this one would be left, this one would be right, and then the ribbon is mono in the center. And it provides a lot more of the sound of the shells. And this is a good mic technique probably for indie bands and stuff like that. It might not be as good for metal bands, but yeah, it kind of does a good job of just capturing a holistic view of the kit just from the overheads. So it's kind of cool like that. And so let's check those overhead tracks out first in the processing. Also on my master, there's only a limiter. There's no additional processing, just so no one's wondering while we're listening to this. Speaking of listening to it, even before we listen to these overhead tracks, we should probably make sure that you actually enjoy the sound of this mix. Otherwise, there's no point learning how to mix like this. So here's the generic drum sound I came up with. So if you like the sound of those drums, then yeah, stick around. Back to where we were, the overheads here. Let's have a listen to these with no effects. So let's listen to the ribbon mic. And you'll hear that the ribbon mic is much darker than the KM184 pencil condensers that are panned left and right. So if we combine that ribbon back in there, we'll hear a little bit of the meat and center image of the drums come back in. I'll mix it a little louder so you can hear it a little better. So you can hear it really captures a lot of the shells compared to the KM184 pencil condensers, which is kind of cool because you can mix that in and get a more complete view of the kit, and that can be useful. And we just want to try it on this project because it's always good to try new stuff and see kind of what techniques you like and tend to gravitate towards. So let's look at the processing on these overheads. The first thing is I have in phase, which is a plugin to ensure that your left and right channels are in phase with each other. So I found that -7 samples actually was the greatest phase correlation for these for this bus, like the left and right channels with all these mics combined. It's kind of confusing, but anyways, listen without in phase and with it, and I think you'll agree that the snare is more centered, and it also, the transient's a little bit cleaner. There's a 0.5 dB gain, which also is helping center the snare here because it's actually making the right channel a little bit louder. But there's also, it also is just lining the transient a little bit better, and I think centering the image better via time alignment as well. So let's listen to that. So subtle, but you know, all recording mixes are kind of like a bunch of little subtle changes that add up to something like you know, something greater than the sum is greater than the parts quote goes here, however that one goes. Yeah, that's a perfect one for right now. So next up I have EQing. This is kind of an odd EQ because I just used like you just went through all the effort of doing this technique to capture the shells and capture the complete view of the kit, and then I'm basically mixing it like a metal kit anyway and getting rid of a lot of the low end. That was never really the plan. That was just something that happened. This mix is actually taken out of context of a whole song. So you could make these drums beefier, but then they might not fit in a mix. This is actually what they ended up being, and these frequencies had to come out. Otherwise, it was pretty muddy in the mix. So you know, sometimes you have to make sacrifices when you're mixing your stuff. But anyways, if we listen to this, it's mostly cymbals that I maintained and high end. And then anyways, next we have kind of like a Fairchild clone. This is a tube compressor. it's just taking a dB off just to kind of level things out and round them off, and then Virtual Tape Machine is doing the same thing. It's just meant to round off the sound and make it a little bit less harsh. And all that stuff's pretty subtle. But yeah, that's the overhead sound of these drums here. Okay, so next up, let's do the other distance mics. Let's do the room mics here, if I can find them. There they are. So we have a mid-side setup with a U87 pointed sideways on figure 8 and a cardioid C414 pointing towards the rear of the room. And that is being... Mid-side's kind of cool because you can, after you decode it, you can choose the width of it and like control it a little bit in post, and then it also collapses down to mono really well. So it's kind of a great way, a great technique to set up for room mics. If you haven't tried mid-side, definitely try it. It's a good skill to know how to do. So this is the room mic final tone. They're mixed in pretty quietly. It's a pretty dry drum mix, but that's the final room sound. I'll just turn this up so we can hear it. And let's listen to how we got that. So the first thing we have is our decoder, decoding our two tracks, our U87 side track and our C414, and turning them into an actual usable stereo image that places the... Well, that's hard to explain. You'll just have to look up how to do mid-side for that. We have a JS stereo enhancer, which is just a plugin that comes with Reaper, and I'm just using that to take everything under 100 hertz and make it mono, just to solidify the center image of the room mics. Because otherwise, I can hear the low end on these headphones anyway, kind of like it has like a stereo-ness to it that sounds cool by itself, but I think in the mix would just end up being muddy. So I'm just monoing that, and then that will just kind of solidify the low end in the mix. I have this crazy EQ. I must have been just dialing crap out, and it's so severe that I have no idea what it's doing exactly, but let's have a listen. Not sure exactly what it's doing. I think it's just doing kind of a curve, just keeping all the mids. Like there's the high shelf here, shelving off stuff, and a low shelf here. I think these are actually acting as high passes and low passes, and then there's a band here at about 500 hertz, just taking out some mud and crap. And then I have a compressor compressing that. Kind of giving it some snap, and then another EQ. Again, just removing some mud, and then I have a reverb on top of because my room's not that reverby. It's actually it's concrete with a totally absorbent ceiling right now, so it doesn't have much reverb to begin with. So I'm just adding another medium room, which is around the size of that room, a medium room reverb sound to it, and that actually gives it more of a room mic sound, as we'll hear right now. So it gives it the impression of some distance and a more expensive room, like maybe a more luxurious live room. Anyways, I don't remember what I set this to. I think it was -6, but I'll put it back to around where it was. And let's just listen to it with the room mics. And if I mute the room mics, I'm not sure. These are pretty quiet. I'm not sure how much of a difference this will make. Yeah, if you're wearing headphones, you might be able to hear that. It's somewhat subtle. Yeah, it is a very dry mix. Okay, what else do we have here? So that's all the distant mics. Let's just do some of the close mics here, starting with the snare, which I think is right around here. So it's just a 57 on the top here. This is just, I think, a Remo Ambassador head. I think this is actually the one that just came with the snare. So the 57 is positioned quite regularly. There's nothing too crazy about that. You can try a few positions and see what you like the best. Personally, I concentrate more on the tuning of the drums, because that's, from my experience, the tuning of the drums is more important than the placement of the mics. As long as you're not placing it somewhere absolutely insane. the difference that having a well-tuned drum makes is way bigger than moving it, you know, half an inch either direction. Of course, I'm not condoning not trying different microphone positions, but definitely make sure your drums are tuned up. Otherwise, it's kind of a futile exercise to begin with. And if your drum's well tuned, pretty much every mic position you try is going to sound good. So if you find that you're trying a bunch of mic positions and nothing's sounding good, it's probably the source material, more likely than not. So there's a 57 on the top and an E609 on the bottom. And I'll show you how those are processed in our track here. So this is the snare bus that the trigger, we took samples of all the shells in the kit, just hard samples. And so these are all triggered hits, but I'm a fan of having like realistic nuances in drums. So I also have a real snare track as well. So any hard hit where the drummer's just playing like a hit that's on a regular beat, I just replace it with a sample because it's supposed to be consistent. But then whenever he has a ghost notes or something like that, I actually switch to the real snare sound. And that sounds kind of weird there. But when you mix that in the actual track, it sounds right. So anyways, I like that because if you use samples, you'll never get ghost notes that sound realistic or proper, or rolls that sound right and stuff like that. The bottom microphone is, it's all of these ones are not processed in this. The folder does the processing for the whole sound. So we're basically busing the bottom and top together before we process it. So they're being processed together. The only thing I have here is I have my own plugin reducing the bleed of the bottom microphone, just because I don't want things to get muddy. And when you add a lot of compression and stuff like that, bleed tends to creep up on you. And so I'll show you without it. So it's just removing some bleed and keeping that under control, just so it doesn't creep up on us. You don't have to remove all bleed. It's just, you know, some bleed has some vibe and stuff like that, but you don't want things getting too muddy. The snare top as well has that plugin as well on it, because it just makes it easier to control bleed and stuff like that. Just make sure that you don't have any crazy bleed going on. So then that's all being bussed to this snare processing track, which is these plugins, which is all Slate stuff again. So we have some crazy EQ, and then a 1176 style compressor, and then a transient designer is basically what's going on here. You don't have to use Slate stuff, but that's just the order of what I use to get this sound. You could use other stuff if you wanted to. Let's do it without any of this processing. It's pretty bland. And then with this processing, and I'll show you that bleed thing. I'll take off the bleed plugin on the bottom mic. And you can hear how bleed kind of creeps up on you a bit there. It's just always a good idea to keep that in check. So that's the processing for the snare. Let's go back to the video and see what's next. I think it's gonna be tom mics here. So here's the tom mics. The drummer brought in, or the Evans hydraulics heads, I think they're called, the ones that are really, really dead. I would not recommend those. Here's the floor tom over here. Oh, no, back to the rack tom. I would not recommend these heads for recording. They're pretty dead sounding unless that's the sound that you really, really want. I used one of my microphone clips to clip an SM81 to try and bring some life back into this head, because I just wanted to capture better transient response than the 57. And I was originally going to blend them in, but I just ended up using the 81s for the toms. Like, I just wanted their extended high end and transient response to try and bring some life back into these tom drums, because even when they're tuned well with these heads, they're pretty dead sounding, and it's pretty hard to get a great sound out of them, or what you'd have in your head. If you think of a good drum sound, it's typically not these heads. So yeah, so that's what that was. The floor tom is mic'd the same way. So SM81s on the toms. A nice thing is I typically use, when possible, the tracks I've recorded. But you'll notice that when we trigger tracks, it lets us do something cool, which is, since we have no bleed, we can do absolutely insane EQing. And you can see that in action here with the 12 dB boost with a huge bell, basically just a huge Q or bandwidth on that. And we could not do that. You likely wouldn't be able to do that with the amount of bleed that's in the raw tracks, because you'd boost cymbals too much. But I'll show you what these actually sound like without this EQ. So that's the sound basically of the hydraulics head. That's decently well tuned. It's tuned a little lower than I should have probably tuned it, but that's decently well tuned. And with this EQ, it's actually usable, but still, you'd probably want what you're starting with to sound closer to this, if you could. So yeah, using the trigger or triggering the samples lets us get away with some crazy EQing, which really helped rescue those sounds in this production. I have no compression or whatever on my toms. You could easily do that. Do whatever you want. This is just a really basic mix. So on this rack tom, same deal, just a big boost, because without it, not really ideal, not too flattering. So anyways, in the end, with those boosts and stuff, they end up sounding kind of cool in conjunction with the overheads and room mics. Not the worst toms ever, so that's cool. And I prefer to use samples taken from the kit when possible versus just paving over it with some crazy professional samples, because often they don't sound like they fit in quite well or quite correctly. Like those samples are from that kit in that room, so they tend to fit in really well and sound really organic, whereas paving over them with like Slate samples or Superior Drummer usually sounds a little bit I don't even know the word, just a little gaudy sometimes. This is the kick mic. It's a little dark, but that's just the D112. There was a 57 we put inside to capture click attack, just didn't end up using it, so it's not in there. Usually you'd want like a Beta 91 or something inside for that. We just didn't have one, so I threw a 57 in just in case I needed that track. But there was plenty of attack on the kick mic, so I ended up just using the D112 alone. And let's have a listen to what the kick mic sounds like. Again, this is a sample. So we have the sample of the kick, and we have an EQ. This is what the raw kick sounds like, so it needed some help for sure. And then with the EQ, we cut out some low end boominess here. It sounded a little bit more like a kick drum, and then all of the heavy-handed EQing is just being done in Virtual Mix Rack here, which there's quite a lot of high-end boosts and stuff to get that click attack back. Again, if you're using samples, you can do this, and that's one of the nice things about samples. The end product would not have been as good if we had to use the raw tracks, because let's see what happens if we use the raw tracks. Actually, that's not terrible. Yeah, you could probably get away with that. But that you could also use my debleeder plugin on that and take some of that bleed out as well if you wanted to just use the originals. Anyways, what I did for this is this processing here, which is a lot of EQing, and then a compressor, and then basically a transient designer, which I believe is almost the exact same chain as the snare. Very similar to the snare. Okay, so I think that we've covered all of the microphones that were used on this, I believe. Yeah, that's all of them, pretty sure. So the only other processing on this is there is on the actual bus itself, there's a compressor and a transient designer again. So all of those tracks that we heard have been being run through this the entire time. And that's just kind of gluing stuff together. And then this whole drum bus with those effects included is sent to another bus called Drum Smash. And Drum Smash is an API 2500, decapitator, and a limiter. And that's just kind of solidifying the sound of it, adding some fatness and some sustain in the cymbals. And if we listen to that all together, so that's without the drum smash bus here. I actually really like clean drums like that though. I think they sound pretty cool and they're just punchy. But this is with drum smash. And it just kind of adds, it just kind of glues it together and adds some fatness to the whole thing. And that's basically all there is to processing a basic drum sound. There's not that much to it. A lot of it's to do with the parallel compression. Getting good sounds at the source is very important, or as good as possible. In this case, they weren't the best, but and also, you know, if you can sample the drum kit and stuff, it lets you get away with the additional processing, which is great. And then also, the cool part about that is you can use the samples, and then also for parts, you can use the actual real drum, because like this part would have never sounded okay as triggers. Well, that part might, but something like this. Let me find the drum roll. Let me just take off the bleeders. Probably not set right for that. Like you're never gonna get that to sound right if it's not the real mic. Let me try and just move this up here and see what it actually does sound like. Yeah, that sounds bad. You'll hear that in a lot of recordings. That's not good. Don't do that. Do this. It's way cooler. And that's pretty much everything. Yeah, so if you have any questions, just let me know. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully it wasn't too boring. Let me know what other videos you guys want me to make. And yeah, cool. Take it easy. Have a good day.